So normally I've been doing this presentation around town. I did it for the priests of the Archdiocese, and it's the same presentation that the priests received. And normally there's a big screen behind me. Oh, see, they can't hear so well. Should I use the microphone?
Sure.
Okay.
If you need help, I can hold.
Now I'm really mic'd up. 18 mics. So,
Would you like a podium? We can bring one out.
yeah, that'd be nice because the papers. Okay, so I was saying that normally I have a screen behind me, and these are slides. So this is the first time I've done it on paper, but I hope that all of you have these and you can follow along. No? Not so many? Okay. There's not a ton of information on them. They were more like cues for me, so I think we're going to be okay, unless I spill them all over the ground, which could happen any moment. So, Amendment 4. First, before we start talking about Amendment 4, I'd like to give you a background on what's actually going on with abortion in general in the United States. And we can start as far back as Roe v. Wade, 1973, that made unrestricted abortion at any time during pregnancy for 40 weeks the law of the land, and we were all very active against that for many decades, all good right-thinking people who saw that this was a brutal way to lead our lives as Americans, a very coarse and brutal teaching, right, on the dignity of life, and how oh, I knew I was going to do that, and how life is just can be casually discarded. Even a life of a baby that can already feel pain and can be without anesthesia taken apart in pieces for no reason of health, of the maternal health or anything, just for an issue of autonomy, right? The woman's autonomy and her desires to lead her life a certain way, which took precedence over the life of the child that she carried. So we lived like that for many decades, and all that time, the reason it was legal to have an abortion through 40 weeks of pregnancy is because another court case, right at the same day as Roe, said that maternal health included the mother's emotional health, so her social health or economic health. So that opened up elective abortion through all 40 weeks of pregnancy. And so we lived like that for a very long time until 2022. And in that time, between 73 and 2022, there were about 60 or 70 million legal abortions in the United States. Although that number is probably an undercount, because nobody was really counting them, right? There were a lot of private abortions that were not being taken into account. So it's a small number probably compared to what really happened. So we're talking about 60 or 70 or 80 million young people destroyed in a violent way. So that's the country we've been living in for decades. In 2022, the amazing Dobbs case happened, and Roe v. Wade was repealed. And this was really good because constitutionally Roe v. Wade was a disaster. And it's wonderful that it's no longer on the Constitution. But what happened was it gave the rights to decide abortion regulations to each state. And that's good and bad, because the pro-abortion side has a lot of money, and they have endless energy, and they have all the levers of power belong to them, in a sense, the media and Hollywood and everything. Their influence is endless. And they're working very hard in every state to basically put Roe v. Wade back on, but at the state level. And Amendment 4 is an attempt to do that in Florida. And I'll explain how, but that's the fight that we're involved in. So right now, I'm on this page, right now, Florida, elective abortion in Florida is legal through 6 weeks of pregnancy, and that's called the Heartbeat Protection Act. And if Amendment 4 passes, then abortion will be legal through 40 weeks of pregnancy. Elective abortion, meaning an abortion because I wanted to have a boy and not a girl, or this is not the right time for me to have a baby. And we're talking about second and third trimester abortions, which actually do happen. So what I think it's important to understand what are the current abortion laws in Florida. My papers are a huge mess. Let's see. So the current abortion laws in Florida state that for the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, a woman can have an abortion for any reason at all. Between 6 weeks and 15 weeks, she can have an abortion for cases of rape, incest, human trafficking, maternal health, like serious maternal health, like a threat to her life, and for fetal disability. Then, from 15 to 40 weeks, she can still have a legal abortion in Florida for maternal health, like serious risk of her life, and for fetal disability. So abortion is very much legal in Florida. You might hear differently. If people will say, if we don't pass Amendment 4, then women are not going to be able to have an abortion when they need one. That's how they say it, right? And you can tell them, no, abortion is legal in Florida and will remain legal in Florida without Amendment 4. And what was after that? Okay. Another thing that's going on in Florida that Amendment 4 would affect tremendously is this page.
I think
this one's in order? Thank you, Father. Could you take those out? I'm sorry. Okay, so another thing that we need to talk about in Florida is that there are many regulations around abortion in Florida. The regulations are in place not to protect the babies in most cases, because every abortion kills a baby, but to protect the moms, which sometimes are girls, right? Lots of abortions are performed on girls under 18. So I have a list of them, and it's not an exhaustive list, but a couple of things we should mention. Every abortion in Florida right now has to be performed by a doctor. And if your 14-year-old daughter is given a chemical abortion pill, it has to be done under the care of a physician who has to examine her before and after to make sure that she doesn't die of the chemical abortion. That's a very important thing. You must have heard a couple weeks ago a lot of noise about 2 women in Georgia who died of chemical abortion, and the pro-abortion side is selling it as a failure because of laws in Georgia that limit abortion, like the same way that they limit them here, right? The same kind of law. They have the same law that we have, even though it was just invalidated in Georgia. But what actually happened was those women had chemical abortions and died of it because they weren't under the care of a physician. And that's something that's not allowed in Florida because we have a regulation around it. Another thing that's one of our regulations in Florida that's very important is parental consent. So if a girl is under 18, she cannot go get an abortion without bringing her mom or her dad or her guardian. And this is very important because we know that trafficking happens, abuse happens, and moms and dads, we are our children's natural and first protectors. And if we are taken out of that equation, the girls can be abused and trafficked and used by unscrupulous men. And that's exactly how it works, right? And so that's why parental consent is so important. Not to mention that we live in a world where all of us know that parental consent is this bright line. Your child's in school, they cannot administer a Tylenol to your 15-year-old in Florida. Obviously, they shouldn't. Maybe your child's allergic to Tylenol and she forgot, right? So they should call you, and you should have to go and give her the Tylenol. So we want to keep things like parental consent, and that's some of the regulations that are extant in Florida right now. Another one would be partial birth abortion is prohibited in Florida. That's a particularly brutal type of abortion where the child is partially delivered and then killed on the way out in a very brutal way. That's not allowed. Believe it or not, some people do that. And it's a practice. I wouldn't call it medicine, but it's a practice. An infant, we have a regulation that says any infant born alive during an abortion has the right to be treated as any baby in Florida who's alive. In other words, if a woman gives birth at the hospital to a preemie, everything will be done for that baby to keep that baby alive and healthy. Well, a baby born alive during an abortion has that same rights in Florida. And you say, well, of course they would help a baby if a baby slipped out, past the abortionist and got away from the knife. But no, in abortion facilities, their job is to eliminate the child. And so a few years ago in Hialeah, we had this terrible case of a woman who was having a 3rd trimester abortion. She delivered the baby in the clinic. The doctor wasn't even there. The baby was supposed to be dead, but was born alive. The owner of the clinic put the baby in a bucket and then hid the bucket in the roof of the clinic. Thankfully, it was discovered and the clinic was closed down and the owner went to jail for murder. That's called murder. Or that's called abortion. Like, for instance, now in Minnesota, that's legal. And there have been already documented cases in the last year and a half, I think, since they passed their own abortion deregulation law, of 6 or 7 babies that were born alive who were not rushed to the hospital, to the neonatal ICU, but were allowed to expire on a cold metal table. And that's because that's what abortionists do. That's what they do for a living. So that's the current state of abortion in Florida. And it's very important for us to know that, because most people don't know that. I've been doing a lot of interviews with radio stations and TV stations with hosts who are presumably informed, right? So presumably they're going to interview me, so they're going to study up and they're going to know what's the state of abortion in Florida. They have no idea. They think abortion is really hard to get in Florida. It's not hard to get in Florida. One of the things that I mention always in my talk, and I always mention it when I'm speaking on the radio or on TV, is that the pushback that you get is that elective abortion for 6 weeks is just not long enough because women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And you're going to hear this. If you talk to your neighbor and you say, hey, are you voting no on Amendment 4? They might say, well, 6 weeks is not long enough. Women need a little more time to make up their minds. You can say to them, because I looked this up, a pregnancy test at Walmart costs 97 cents, and it's 99% accurate. So if a woman is 100% sure that if she gets pregnant, she's aborting that baby, she can have a 97-cent test every week of her life and then go to the abortionist when the test comes back positive. So nobody is going wanting for an abortion in Florida. If a woman wants one, she can have one. I don't think that's a good thing, but you're going to find a lot of people who think that that's the way things ought to be. And let's face it, the reason they think that is because that's how our culture is built, right? If you're going to have a sexually liberated culture and everyone's going to live together before they get married and everyone's going to experiment sexually and live their best lives, abortion is the backstop to all that. And that is the culture that we live in. That's the culture that young people have been growing up in since day one. That's what's expected of them. So of course, 6 weeks seems early. At 6 weeks, the baby's heart beats, and I'm a radiologist, but one of the things that I do is my favorite part of my practice is fetal ultrasound. And it's, for me, I never get tired of seeing that heartbeat of a baby that's so tiny. It's less than 2 centimeters in length. We always measure from the top of the head to the butt. For some reason, that's how we do it. And that baby has a heartbeat, and it's not the same heartbeat as the mom's. The mom's heart might be beating at 80 or 90 beats per minute, and the baby's beating at 160, because it's a little tiny thing. And I can, today's the Feast of the Guardian Angels. When I see a very young baby like that, a tiny baby, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, I always pray to the baby's guardian angel to protect the baby, because I know that the womb is a very dangerous place for a human being in Florida and in every state in our country and all over the world. At day one of conception, on day one, that one cell human being is a living human being, has its own DNA distinct from mom and dad. That's a living human being already, day one. And that's something that's not a theological opinion or an emotional opinion. that is biology. This is what we're taught in medical school, and every biologist understands that a little tiny embryo is his or her own person. And that's just science. Around week 5, the heart starts to beat, and then we can start seeing it around week 6. At week 6, the baby has brain activity that is detectable, even though, again, we're talking about a creature this small. At week 9, the baby can already sigh and stretch and suck her thumb. At week 13, the body of the baby is sensitive to touch. We don't know when the baby starts to feel pain exactly, but I can tell you that if they do these miraculous surgeries on pregnant women for their babies, they open the belly, they take the baby out, they operate on the baby, and then they put him back. Is that amazing? I mean, we live in miraculous times. And do you think that they anesthetize the baby before they operate? Yes, because they don't want to hurt the baby. But abortions are performed in the 2nd and 3rd trimester without anesthesia for that baby. So probably the babies start to feel pain around 15 weeks. We're not 100% sure because you can't ask them and they can't cry out. So it's a scientific inquiry. And at week 21, babies start to be viable. And that's only halfway through a pregnancy. Week 21 is very early. I have these beautiful images of babies at different stages of development that maybe you can look at in your packets. I have a picture here of a baby who was born at week 21, a little tiny, tiny thing, less than a pound. And she was one of the earliest examples of a premature baby that young who survived her birth. And here she is at the age of 4, a beautiful little girl. And I'm sure she spent 8 months in the neonatal ICU. And we all invested as taxpayers millions and millions of dollars into her care, and she was worth every penny. So in the same hospitals and in the same minds where we devote so much energy and care and love to neonates who are struggling for life, we also destroy them for no reason at all. It's a schizophrenic attitude. It's absolute schizophrenia that we live in. And Amendment 4 would double down and just bake that into our minds and into our hearts as a people. So what is an abortion? An abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn child. Intentional killing of an unborn child. That's a very important phrase to understand, because the pro-abortion side likes to confuse the material, and they call lots of things abortion which are not abortion. Sometimes a woman, when she's pregnant, may have a crisis in her pregnancy, and her pregnancy has to be terminated. If the baby's delivered alive, that's not an abortion. The baby might die later because the baby was too young or the baby was sick, but nobody killed that baby intentionally. And as Catholics, that's something that maybe is more accessible to us because we have more sophisticated minds, because we study things like moral theology, and we can understand that the intent matters. But doctors understand this too. The vast majority of OBGYNs do not perform abortions. They simply do not do it. And yet, they take care of women who are having ectopic pregnancies, preeclampsia, premature rupture of membranes, miscarriage, any host of problems that sadly happen during pregnancy, and they can treat women effectively without abortion, because abortion is the intentional killing of a human life. Over 95% of all abortions are performed on healthy babies of healthy mothers. Healthy and healthy. This is something that is highly contentious, but those are the stats. And the other side wants you to think that 2nd and 3rd trimester abortions are done on women who are very sick, but it's actually not true. The same stats hold whether you're having an abortion at 10 weeks or at 30 weeks. Most of the babies, the vast majority of babies are healthy, and so are the moms. Why would a woman have an abortion at 28 weeks or 30 weeks? When she's asked, and this is not me asking, this is Planned Parenthood asking the women who come to their doors, the answers are the same as when they're having earlier abortions. Because I didn't get around to it, because the baby's father isn't here for me, because I don't have the money, because I'm on drugs, because my parents don't approve. I mean, actually, that's probably not one of the answers exactly. But the answers are the same. They're social issues. They're social issues, which I don't say are minor issues. These are tragic. These are all tragedies. If a woman's driven to take that step, something is driving her. There's something tragic behind her. But it's not maternal health, and that's important to know. Okay, I wanted to, I always explain what the abortion procedures are, because Amendment 4 makes all of these procedures legal. So you ought to know what they are and how dangerous they are. And it's in your packets, but I will hold them up. The over 65% of abortions today are chemical, not surgical anymore. So you have to know what a chemical abortion is. A chemical abortion is a 2-pill process. I think I did that one already. Thank you, Father.
I'm burning calories.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yes, you are. A chemical abortion is a 2-pill process. The first pill is called mifepristone, and it cuts off the progesterone in a woman's body, in her blood, and this takes away the baby's blood support, the blood vessels that are feeding the baby. The baby dies, and then the woman follows up with a second, in 24 or 48 hours, with a second pill called misoprostol, and that causes violent contractions of the uterus, and the baby is expelled. Okay, I just said violent contractions and the baby is expelled. It's a horrifying experience. Women who've had this experience describe it as nightmarish. And this is recommended by the FDA through the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. At 10 weeks, the baby's pretty big. And so women are delivering visible babies on their own, at home. Some of these women are little girls, basically. If you've ever had a 13 or 14-year-old girl, you know she's a little girl. She's not a woman. So that's chemical abortion. It's very dangerous because if it's done outside that 10-week window, it rises exponentially in danger because of retained, if everything is not expulsed, the woman becomes infected and then can die, and that's what happened to those women in Georgia. But many women have died of chemical abortion. The next kind of abortion is the DNC, dilatation and curettage, and that's done between 5 and 13 weeks, and that's simply the cervix is dilated, and the babies are, these are big babies. Some of them feel pain, probably. The cervix is dilated, and then a vacuum extractor is inserted into the uterus and simply sort of tears the baby apart, and it's all neatly vacuumed up. Another very painful procedure, but at least the woman is not paying attention, not watching what's coming out. The next procedure is the dilatation and evacuation abortion. It's done from 13 to 24 weeks. Remember, babies are viable around 21, 22, 23 weeks. So these babies are viable. A lot of these babies. If mom held on just a little longer, she could give birth to the baby and give the baby up for adoption, for instance, if she doesn't want to parent the baby. One of my 5 children is adopted, and she's a blessing in my life. Thank God that her mother and father gave her life. But women don't wait. They don't want to wait, and they have these terrible procedures. So this procedure works. Again, the cervix is dilated, but the baby doesn't fit in the vacuum. So instead, these terrible instruments called Sofer clamps are inserted into the uterus, and the baby's just pulled out in pieces. Whatever they can grasp, they just pull. It's horrifying. The last thing to come out is the head, and that has to be crushed because it doesn't fit. And then the abortionist reassembles the baby on a tray to make sure that he didn't leave any pieces behind. So we're talking, when people talk to you about abortion, they're talking to you about these things, these procedures. And they're shocking and horrifying, but I think If you don't know what you're fighting against, then you don't have the passion that you need to make a difference, in my opinion. The last type of abortion is called the induction abortion. This is the kind of abortion the woman had whose baby was born alive in Hialeah, and they're not uncommon. They're about 1% of all abortions are late-term abortions, and if there have been 70 million abortions since 1973, that's a big number. The induction abortion is very ugly. On the first day, through the wall of the uterus, the doctor takes a big needle and just sort of blindly injects digoxin, which is a heart-stopping drug, into the baby, whatever part of the baby he can reach. The baby's heart stops, the baby dies. The woman she's laminaria are put in her cervix to start the cervical dilatation. She's sent home with her big belly. This could be at 38 weeks. These are big, big bellies. Women who've been pregnant for many, many weeks. She's sent home with her dead baby and told, come back when you go into labor, probably in about 3 days. Sometimes she gets back on time and she gives birth to her dead baby at the clinic, and sometimes she just gives birth at home in the toilet because she doesn't get back on time. And that's the abortion. That's one of the types of abortion that the abortion lobby is very eager to make common in Florida. That's their aim. So that brings us to Amendment 4. Amendment 4 has this amazing title, which makes me want to vote for it: Limiting Government Interference with Abortion. Because all of us want to limit government interference, right? Like, we don't want the nanny state telling us what to do. So that's a great title that they decided on. They must have spent $10 million just coming up with the perfect language. There are no accidents about this. The abortion amendment, Amendment 4 has only 2 sentences. Most amendments to constitutions, to state constitutions, are very long and very complex and have a lot of definitions. Because once you put something on the Constitution, it's stuck. It's very difficult to take it off. So people are very careful about what they put on the Constitution. This amendment is very purposefully short and vague, because what it is basically is a Trojan horse that holds all sorts of goodies. So the entire amendment is 2 sentences. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. So that's the first sentence. Let's go through that sentence first. So, no law shall penalize, delay, or prohibit or restrict. Okay, so, no law. All the regulations I talked to you about, like a doctor should be there, this type of abortion shouldn't be done, the parents have to come in and consent. Every single one of those regulations would delay an abortion. In some cases, they would restrict an abortion, because if you're a parent and you say, oh, no, I don't agree to this for my daughter, you just restricted an abortion. So every regulation on the books that keeps women and girls safe in Florida around these procedures would be eliminated by Amendment 4, by that sentence in Amendment 4, because every regulation somehow delays or restricts abortion. So all of the laws will be nullified, even basic safety laws. So when you go down there to the GI Care Center to have your colonoscopy, and you want to know that the government takes a real interest, right? The ACA, the Health Administration of Florida, goes there and they make sure that the hallways are wide, and there's an oxygen tank in every room, and they have the defibrillator where they can reach it. All those things are regulated by the government because you want medicine to be practiced safely. I've had my own center. It's a real pain in the butt for the people who are running the center, but it's good for the patients. All those abortion centers across Florida, and they would spring up like mad under Amendment 4, would be deregulated. And maybe not right away, but they would start cutting corners, and Amendment 4 would make it impossible to regulate them properly. Just abortion centers, not colonoscopy centers, but abortion centers. So the place where these late-term abortions I'm talking about, take place will be less safe than your colonoscopy center. Then it says there will be no laws to restrict abortion through viability, but it doesn't say when viability is. And that's really weird for a constitutional amendment, but they did it on purpose, because who decides what's viability? It could be just the receptionist at Planned Parenthood could say, oh no, viability is like 25 weeks, go on in, we'll do the abortion. Because it's not defined. Whatever's not defined is open to interpretation. And the people who are going to interpret it are going to be the people who have a monetary interest in performing more abortions. So viability is undefined. And then it says, and after viability, in order to protect the mother's health. And it doesn't say to save her life. It says to protect her health. So now we're back to that Roe v. Wade formulation. Under Roe v. Wade, what is a maternal health? Yes, maybe it's her physical health, but it's her emotional health, her social health, her economic health, her educational health. It could be any kind of health, and then it says, as determined by her health provider. Another undefined term. It doesn't say physician. This is crazy that it doesn't say physician. These are tremendously dangerous procedures. And they specifically didn't say physician, they said health provider. A health provider in Florida has about 48 different definitions according to the statutes in the different parts of the book, these giant books in Florida. And a tattoo artist is a health provider, for instance. So, you know how the abortion side always says, abortion should be between a woman and her doctor. Well, guess what? That was all a lie. Because as soon as they get the chance, they throw the doctor out the door and they replace it with a tattoo artist, I guess. Because they know that most doctors don't perform abortions. It's not about healthcare. Abortion isn't healthcare, so doctors don't perform abortions. They have a vested interest in both patients. That's how we were taught. Both patients are our patients, and we want to bring them both safely through the pregnancy. So, if Amendment 4 passes in Florida, Florida would be like North Korea or Cuba. It would be a place where abortion is just Wild West, and it would become an abortion destination. And it would be a brutal place to live and a very dangerous place for women and girls. Let's see. That. Okay, we go to the second sentence. It's only 2 sentences, so we won't go much further. The second sentence says, the amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require parental notification. A lot of people are confused by this. And again, I've been doing these interviews, and people who are interviewing me are sure that notification and consent are the same thing. I don't know why they think that, but I explain to them, this is what notification looks like. Your soccer coach, who's been abusing your daughter, finds out, she tells him she's pregnant, he takes her to the Planned Parenthood down the street and says she needs an abortion. They say, great, that'll be $700, and nobody calls mom and dad. What's parental notification? It's a postcard. They hand the girl a postcard and they say, here, write down your parents' name and address so we can notify them that you've had an abortion. There, maybe some more scrupulous abortion providers will do a better job and like pick up the phone and find mom and dad and say, oh, your daughter's in the back having an abortion. But these people aren't scrupulous. They're not good people. So since it's not defined in the amendment, notification becomes whatever they think notification could possibly mean in order for them to access more girls. So a pregnant girl in Florida will be at the mercy of unscrupulous abortion providers, pill pushers, and without a physician oversight. Again, we go back to the physician thing. A physician sees a girl, right? He or she is more trained and hopefully more ethical and will stop and say, wait, have you been consented properly? Has someone asked your parents? I mean, that's part of physician training, but it's not the training, it's not an ethical training part of health providers who are not trained to be so conscientious about consent. So that's consent. If Amendment 4 doesn't pass in Florida, abortion will still be legal in Florida. But if Amendment 4 does pass, abortion becomes, again, it's a Trojan horse. It's a big, huge, empty promise, but inside is so much danger and so much coarsening of our culture, so much sadness for so many people, and really the most vulnerable people that we can think of, which are women and girls who are carrying a life inside. And this is exactly who we should be protecting, the life inside and the life of the mother. One thing that you can be sure of is that our tax monies will be used to pay for abortion if Amendment 4 passes. It says so on the ballot. They had to add the ballot language that likely it will cause abortion to be taxpayer funded. And that's something else you could tell your friends. Many people will say, like they used to say before the Civil War, say, well, I would never own a slave, but I can't tell my neighbor not to own slaves, right? Some people will say, oh, I would never have an abortion, but I couldn't tell someone else to have not to have an abortion, and I don't want to pay for other people's abortions because, I do think that would be wrong. So maybe you have friends like that who draw a line at paying for abortion. They don't want to stop abortions, but they don't want to pay for them. You can assure them that Amendment 4 will make it so that we all pay for abortion through Medicaid, through other ways. Why? Because if you don't have $700 for Planned Parenthood, you have now restricted abortion access. There's a clinic on US 1 that I pass all the time on 27th Avenue or 30th Avenue, and it's called Today's Woman? Today's Woman?
Yeah, big buildings.
Pink building. It has abortion clinic written all over it. So I was driving past with my daughter. I picked her up at school. My 17-year-old, we were driving by, and I was like, I'm going to call them and see. So this is 2 days ago. So I called them and I said, are you an abortion clinic? Sí, mamita. In Spanish, of course. Yes, mamita. She kept calling me mamita. And I said, well, what kind of abortions do you do? Only up to 6 weeks. I said, do you do surgical? Yes. And she said, oh, and also the abortion pill. And she said, and they cost the same, $700. Like that was the conversation, flat out, we do abortions, mamita, $700. It's just know that abortion providers are not your friends. They are the bottom of the barrel. They're the worst of the worst. Someone asked me yesterday on a radio show, why would a doctor ever go into that field? And I said, because they've been kicked out of every hospital they've ever worked at. Because they cut corners, they're chapuceros, they do everything, they break the law, they lose their patients, they don't follow up, and then eventually, where they end up? At Today's Woman's Healthcare in the little pink building on US 1, charging $700 to destroy children. Because good doctors don't do that. We didn't go to medical school for that. And that brings me to the last thing, and it's very important because you're going to hear this a lot, that doctors right now in Florida, in Georgia, anywhere that abortion is not wide open and deregulated, they are losing women. Like they're not able to treat women properly, and they're not giving them treatments for ectopic pregnancy, and if they're miscarrying, they won't do the DNC on time, and this is it's a winning argument for the other side because the media backs them up and nobody questions. The media never questions. But a couple months ago, I got a letter, I got an email, and every doctor in Florida got one, explaining very carefully from the Department of Health what's an abortion and what's not. And I am a radiologist. I don't do clinical medicine. I don't touch patients. But I knew everything that they explained, so I can assure you every OBGYN knows what an abortion is. And it said very specifically, remember, treatment for ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. Treatment for miscarriage is not an abortion. Treatment for premature rupture of membranes is not an abortion. So it's been explained and explained and explained. And again, I have OBGYN friends who've practiced for 40 years and have never performed an abortion and have never lost a patient. So how is that possible? If you can't perform abortion, women will die. Where are all these dead women? In places where abortion isn't practiced. When I trained at Jackson Memorial Hospital, I think it's still like this, no abortions were performed in Jackson. Not one. And we took really good care of those thousands and thousands and thousands of pregnant women. And, yeah, sometimes women died because pregnancy is dangerous and God sometimes calls us in the middle of our lives, not towards the end. But you don't need to do abortion to practice good medicine. And every doctor knows that. So that's another argument that you might be faced with when you go out there and you fight against Amendment 4 with all your heart, because this is a battle we have to win in Florida. We really have to win this battle. Put a yard sign in your yard, my husband won't let me put a bumper sticker on my car because he doesn't want the car to be keyed, but maybe you're braver than my husband. And be vocal, I think, on social media, because we are defending not just unborn children who deserve, they're the most vulnerable and voiceless among us. How can we turn our backs on them? But we're also defending their moms, who unfortunately have been simmering in a culture which has been pushing them down the wrong road since day one, since the first day they were born. And we know what the culture is like. The culture is dark. The culture is evil. And abortion is the result of all this. So let's stand up for moms, whether they're 14 or 44, and for every baby that is already alive, already a child of God, and already has his or her own guardian angel that we can pray to today on the Feast of the Guardian Angels, that the guardian angels protect all our unborn children in Florida from Amendment 4. Thank you.